Hi, my name is Kyle, and I'm here with Jesse.
And today we're going to give you a brief rundown on the basics of rugby for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the sport, like myself. I know I'm not alone in being a little in the dark about rugby, given its relative popularity in the US. For context, there are over 24 million basketball players in the US compared to just 125,000 rugby players. So it's no surprise that not many people here know much about the sport, so we're going to give you a little crash course.
Absolutely. Most people that I talk to about rugby do not know much about it. If they do know anything about rugby, they usually know nothing about its deep history.
So starting with that history, the origins of rugby can be traced back over 2,000 years to the Roman ball game called harpistrum, but the modern game of rugby originated out of an early form of football or soccer for us Americans. In this old game of football, players were allowed to catch the ball and kick the ball, but that was about it. But then, as the story goes, a football match was taking place at the Rugby School in Rugby, Warwickshire, England in 1823 between Rugby and Bigside. And in the middle of the match, one of the players, named William Webb Ellis, picked up the ball with his hands and ran with it. And so the sport was born. And while there's a lot of controversy over the validity of the story, the world's first club, called the Guy's Hospital Football Club, formed in 1843, was formed entirely by boys from the rugby school, and the Rugby World Cup trophy is now named after William Webb Ellis himself. In 1863, a bunch of clubs, the leader being the French Blackheath Rugby Club, left the Football Association, and in 1871, that group of 21 clubs founded the Rugby Football Union that we know today. Since rugby originated in England, it's most widely played by nations of the Commonwealth. Over time, rugby came to be a popular sport for members of high society, like those who would attend the universities of Cambridge and Oxford. Likewise, when it was first introduced into the US, it was first picked up by Harvard, Yale, and the other Ivies. Nowadays, rugby is very much so a worldwide sport, but is very much so still most popular in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, so just as you mentioned, there are unique catching, passing, and kicking rules for the sport of rugby. I'm going to give a brief overview of how to play 15s rugby, which means a match that is played by two opposing teams with 15 players each. Before I get into more of the strategic side of the game, I will explain the typical layout for a match. Two 40-minute halves of continuous play where the objective is to outscore your opponent. The pitch is 100 meters long with a 10-meter try zone on each end. To score, a team may place the ball down inside the try zone, which is called a try for 5 points. A conversion kick opportunity, which is awarded directly after a team scores a try for 2 points, or a penalty kick, which can be taken after a penalty is awarded, or a drop goal, which can occur anytime during play for 3 points. To advance the ball towards the try zone, you may run with the ball, pass it backwards to one of your teammates, or kick the ball forward. Although I won't go into what strategy is best during a given situation, I will say a combination of all three of these is essential in any successful drive. While the offense's goal is to score the maximum amount of points in the drive, the defense's goal is to prevent the offense from getting closer to the try line by tackling the ball carrier. When the ball carrier is tackled, a ruck is formed. During a ruck, the offense's goal is to maintain possession of the ball by protecting the ball carrier from being stripped of the ball from the defense. Each time the ball carrier is tackled, if the ball is maintained by the offense, what we call a phase is completed. So basically, from the initial ball movement from a ruck to the next tackle is called a phase.
So from an outsider's point of view, I kind of associated a phase to something similar to like a play in football. Would you say that's a correct association or no?
Not necessarily. This is a good way to understand the initial concept, but the flow of a game is drastically different to that of American football. Phases are not only stopped if the ball goes out of bounds, a penalty is committed and awarded, or points are scored. If the ball goes out of bounds, the team that is awarded the ball by the refs gets to throw the ball perpendicular to where it left the field of play. Both teams have a chance at the ball, as players are thrown into the air to receive the ball. The situation is called a lineout. If a penalty is awarded, a team may play off the spot of the penalty, kick the ball for a penalty try, or out of bounds to receive a throw-in, or opt for what is called a scrum. In a scrum, 8 players on each team bind together in order to push against each other to attempt to gain possession of the ball. The ball is placed in between the teams, and whichever team is able to kick the ball backwards gains possession. Some penalty includes offsides, which we see in soccer, a high tackle, which is fairly self-explanatory, a forward pass, and a knock on, which is when the ball moves forward without being kicked or otherwise held in possession by a ball carrier. Although this is a very basic overview, this gives the general rules and concepts of how rugby is played.
So, like any other sport, rugby gives people a great way to escape the stress of daily life and to come together as a group with your team. So, rugby has played an especially important role in building community throughout history.
Rugby in society today is very much similar to a traditional gentleman's game. The importance of honor and respect are found within all aspects of rugby, from when it was created, when it was first brought to the US, and during the present day. The Ivy League schools were the first teams in the US, and there was a special emphasis on being upper class and showing proper etiquette on the pitch, while they brawled in a quite aggressive and physical match. So just as Jesse mentioned earlier, rugby is gaining popularity in the US. It has especially gained traction within the last 20 or so years, as more matches are broadcast throughout the world, and it has become more accessible to athletes nationwide. For me, I found out about rugby when I was first asked to join my high school team and had not even heard about it growing up. Now, I watch any game that I can access on television and am still playing competitively. Our community may be small, but because we are so close-knit, we make a huge impact on those who do find out about the sport.
So, rugby obviously has very English roots and therefore is a big part of English culture. So, what I thought was really interesting was how that culture extended to the rest of the Commonwealth nations like Ireland, Scotland, Wales, New Zealand, even South Africa. I guess for me, it was just cool to see how these countries like South Africa and New Zealand can have such distinct cultures from those of the UK, but also have rugby as such an essential part of their culture in common. So while I definitely have a lot to learn about rugby, I feel like my little glimpse into the sport was really eye-opening for me. For one, I thought it was really interesting to consider the role that rugby plays in society, as Kyle talked about before. In my eyes, rugby was always a very macho, hyper-masculine game, and I never would have thought that such high values and morals were an integral part of the game.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to learn something about the discussion, Jesse, and I hope anyone else who is listening to this also had an opportunity to learn something as well.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to our rugby crash course. We hope that you learned just a little bit about this fascinating sport and that you may have been inspired to learn a little bit more about the sport of rugby in the future.